So we've been looking a lot at the accounts application in django-allauth. It's time now to look at the social account application. And this is where you can hook up third-party providers such as Google, GitHub, Facebook and so on to your Django applications. And that enables you to outsource authentication to those providers. And with django-allauth you get a common package that can manage multiple providers. And that gives you lots of functionality out of the box for things like user linking and social login and so on. So this can save you a lot of work and a lot of time, and it's really easy to set up using django-allauth. So whether you're building a new project or you want to add social authentication to an existing project, django-allauth is going to handle that heavy lifting, so we're going to explore that in this video. So let's dive in. So let's take a quick look at the third-party accounts introduction page, and it tells us here that a third-party or social account is a user account where the authentication is delegated to an external identity provider. And it's the allauth.socialaccount application that's responsible for managing these social accounts. And here's a couple of things supported by this package. For example, connecting one or more social accounts to a local or regular account. And it also supports disconnecting a social account and optional instant sign up for social accounts with no questions asked. So we're going to look at some of that in this video. What we can do to start with is actually install the package. So I'm going to copy this command here and let's go to VS Code. And because we're using UV at the bottom, we can run UV add and we're going to add that package there, the social account extensions. And you can see that's already installed. We can now clear this out. And the next step is to add some things to installed apps. Now before we do so, let's go back to the documentation and let's have a look at the quick start section that we looked at before. Now we're going to introduce a couple of concepts here as we look at this. We saw before that we had installed allauth and also the account application that we looked at in previous videos. And by the way, you can find a link to this playlist on django-allauth just below this video. What we're going to do now is add the social account application, and then we have this concept of providers. So if you want to enable social login for a particular service, for example Amazon or Google and so on, what you need to do is add the specific provider applications to installed apps. So whatever providers you want to enable, you're going to add these applications to installed apps. Now let's just start simple here with social account itself. I'm going to go back to installed apps and at the bottom we can paste that in. That is the native package dealing with social authentication in django-allauth. And one of the powerful things, as we'll see, is that this is fully integrated with the account application, so they work seamlessly together. And that integration is another core concept behind django-allauth. Now this package here introduces a couple of models. We're going to look at those later in the video. And in this video we're going to look at the Google provider. It's one of the most commonly used. So if we go back to the documentation, we can scroll down and you can see there's a lot of providers supported out of the box. We can copy the one for Google and we can put that back here at the bottom of installed apps. Now with the provider, you need to register the application. So we're going to go to Google Cloud Platform soon and we're going to register this application. And whatever the provider is, you're going to have a way to register an OAuth application. For example, GitHub has the developer settings where you can set that up. So that's coming up soon. We'll go to the Google Cloud Platform, but for now we're going to go to the terminal and I want to run uv run manage.py migrate. Now we added a couple of models here, so we're going to run the migrations for these models and that's going to affect the underlying database. You can see the migrations from the social account application are being applied here. And if we go to the database for this project, you can see at the bottom we have some new tables associated with the social account application. We have a social account table itself. We also have a social app table and a token table as well. Now the social account table, let's have a look at what we have here. Notice importantly we have a foreign key here to the user. So the social account table links a Django user to their social media accounts. And whenever a user authenticates with a social provider, it's going to create a row in this table. And it's important to note you can have multiple third-party accounts associated with one user. For example, a user could log in with Google and then later on they could log in with GitHub. That is possible and you can have multiple providers for a user. Now if we go to the social app table, notice among the other columns we have a client ID and a secret column. And this is going to store the client ID and secret from the provider that we have, for example from Google Cloud Platform. We'll see that very soon. And the social token table here, we're going to look at that not in this video but in a future video. In a nutshell, that's going to store the OAuth tokens for each social account. So let's now log into the Django admin and what we're going to do is add a new social provider. And that's going to create a row in this social app table as we'll see very soon. So we've now logged into the admin and we're going to go to social applications and you can see at the moment we don't have any, so we're going to add one using this button at the top right. And notice we get this form here. The only provider we have here is Google, and the reason for that is because it's the only provider that we added to installed apps. Now if we were to copy that to the line below and change the provider to, for example, GitHub, if we go back to this page here and refresh the page, you can see we get that option appearing in the form. For now, let's just keep it at Google only. Now before we can add Google as a provider, we need to obtain this client ID and secret key from Google Cloud Platform. So we're going to open that just now, and if we go back to the 𝗏𝗏 documentation, there's a page here on adding Google as a provider. So what we essentially want to do is go through the app registration process to create a Google application and obtain a key and a secret through the developer console. So we're now in Google Cloud Console, and you can see I've created a project here called Django-allauth demo, and this is the project we're going to link up to the application. So essentially we're going to configure 𝗏𝗏, and we're going to allow Google to act as a third-party identity provider for our Django application. Now to get this started, what we need to do is go to the API and Services section, and we have a subsection here called Credentials. We're going to click through to that, and what we need to do here is add a credential, and that's going to add this 𝗏𝗏 to Client ID. Now at the top we have a Create Credentials button, and we want to create an 𝗏𝗏 client ID, so let's click this one here. Now we get taken to this form here, and we're asked what kind of application we have. So it could be an Android app or an iOS app. For us it's going to be a web application, so let's select that. And we can give this a name. For example, I'm going to call this 𝗏𝗏 Client 1 for whatever reason, I don't know. Let's call it that. And if we scroll down, we're going to go to this redirect URL section. This is really important. Basically, after the authentication process is complete, Google is going to redirect back to the Django application, and this redirect URL is going to be where it actually redirects to. So we need to fill this out. Let's add a URL, and I'm going to paste something in here. It's going to be localhost 8000/accounts/google/login/callback. Now this is the standard pattern for Django-allauth callback URLs. You have this URL and you can substitute the provider here for whatever you're using. For example, it could be GitHub instead of Google. But this has to be filled out so that Google knows where to send the client after the authentication process. Now we can now click the Create button at the bottom. And when you click that, you get this form here where you can copy the client ID and the client secret. And what we're going to do is go back to the Django admin, and I'm going to fill these out. So here we were adding the Google provider. Let's give this a name, and I'm just going to give it a name of Google 𝗏𝗏, and we can paste in the client ID that we copied. And I'm also going to paste in the client secret that we got from the Google Cloud Platform. And we can leave the key and settings fields blank, and all we need to do now is save this. And now in the social applications section of the admin, we have Google 𝗏𝗏 registered as a social application. And that creates the associated row here in this database. So if we refresh the data that we have here, we now have this record. Now let's go back to the Django-allauth documentation. So app registration, we've already done that. We've added the provider to installed apps, and we've registered that provider using the admin. Now what you can do as well is you can add a setting called social account providers, and for each provider that you have, for example Google, you can have a dictionary of options and data. And one example of this is you can define scopes. So if you want to fetch additional scopes from Google, you can do so using this setting here. And notice here that it says by default, if you do not specify a scope, the profile scope will be requested, and optionally the email scope will be requested as well, and that depends on whether this setting is enabled or not. Now let's assume that we want to always get the email. What I'm going to do is amend the settings just to show how we can do this. So let's just copy this for brevity, and we can paste it into the bottom of settings.py. So I'm going to paste that in there, and we can remove these extra settings here. So all we're doing here is we're setting social account providers, and for the Google provider, we are setting up two scopes, the profile scope, which is by default going to be requested anyway, and then the email scope, and that returns the email address information for the user. So you can add the provider using the admin, and you can set up additional settings here using this. So I want to actually test this out. We are actually ready to test this out now. So let's save settings.py and go back to the web application. And let's log out of the Django admin here and go back to localhost 8000, and we're going to load up our application. So remember, this doesn't look good. We're not focusing on styles at all here. But if we go to sign up, we're going to notice something new here. And actually, I'm going to remove this ridiculous message we added in a previous video. And now that that's magically gone, what we're going to do is go to the bottom, and we have a new section here on using a third party. So Google is listed because we've set up that provider and added the social account. But what happens if we actually click this here? Let's try that out. We get taken to /accounts/google/login, and we can click continue here to be taken to Google for the next step in the authentication process. So let's click that just now. And I have a set of users here, and the one we want to log in as is 𝗬𝗧 test user. This is an account I've created specifically for this video, and it's this guy here. He doesn't have any emails, and he has this slightly quirky profile picture from Google. He does not fill in password fields on websites. He only logs in through social authentication, so we need to account for this guy. So let's log in now using this and see if it works. And we get prompted for this permissions section here. So you can consent to this by clicking continue, and you get information about the scopes that have been requested. So the profile scope and also the email scope here. We can click continue, and then you can see it's processing, and we are now magically logged into the application. So that seems to be working, but what is actually happening under the hood? Let's take a look at the database just now. So if we go to the social account table, remember before we had no data here. If we now refresh this table, you can see we have a new record. So in this table, we have the ID of a new user, and we have the provider being set to Google, and we have an ID, last login, date joined, and so on. Now, a couple of important fields here. We have a foreign key to the user ID, and that's set to the value 10. And we also have a JSON field here of extra data, and I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to paste it into a JSON formatter website so that we can look at this. So I've pasted that data in here, and you can see on the right hand side some of the information, for example, the email address of the user that has signed up. We also have the profile picture here, and that's going to be a link to this nice profile picture that we have for the user. And we also have the given name and family name for this user. So we know the first name and last name, and this guy actually is called 𝗬𝗧. That's what's on his birth certificate. Now we can extract information from this extra data that's stored as a JSON column. We'll see how to do that later in the video. If we now go to the user table here, and I'm going to double click that, we have the user with the ID of 10, and notice the password field here. This is actually an unusable hash. So no hashing algorithm that is set up with Django is going to be able to produce this, and that's because this user is not going to be able to sign in with a password. It is a social account only. And if we go to the right hand side here, notice that it has filled out these details. For example, it's got the last name and the username here. It's got the correct email address. And if we go to the right hand side, it's got the correct first name. So all of that information is extracted from that 𝗬𝗧 authentication process, and the user record is stored in the database, and the social account record is linked to that user. And it's on this social account record where we have this extra data that we can extract information from depending on the scopes that we provided in the settings. Now if we go to the terminal, let's have a look at what has happened at the bottom here. Notice that when we sent the login request, it sent that post request there, and then we were redirected to Google, and then after that authentication took place on the Google provider, it redirected us back to the callback URL that we set up on Google Cloud Platform. Now there are different query parameters in this URL. For example, the scope is set here. Notice we also have a code, and the callback URL in django-allauth can handle exchanging that code for an access token. So that's a little bit about how it actually works, but it does sign us up to the application, create the database records including a user record, and then log us in and send us to this secret page. That is for authenticated users only, so it's all working, and we've added Google as a provider. And we've seen the linkage between the social account that's created and the parent user model that's built into Django. And now that the link is made, we can display user information on this page. For example, the full name of the user. So let's go to secret.html, and that represents that page that we saw there. And let's add a paragraph tag here. And we're going to reference user.getFull_name. So underscores between all of those words. That's actually a method on the user model in Django, and it concatenates the first name and the last name. So if we save that and go back to the page, notice we get this user here. His name is 𝗬𝗧 and the surname is test user. Now we can also access the social account data. So let's go to the documentation for the social account application. And there's one of these sections here on template tags. So there's a number of useful template tags for working with third-party accounts. And to use those in a template, we need to load them in. So we can load social account at the top of the template. Let's do that just now. And the first one of these I want to look at is just down here. For easy access to social accounts for a user, you can use this one here. And it's called Get Social Accounts, and we pass the user into that, and we get back some accounts that we can use. Let's copy this and paste it into this template. And I'm just going to keep this all at the top here. So once we've done that, we can actually access accounts here. And let's see what happens when we go back to the page. So for this user, they have a single social account, and that's for Google. And if you want to get social accounts that are associated with a particular provider, you can do that by accessing the property. So accounts.google is going to only give us back the ones associated with Google in this case. And you can see this is a list containing a single social account. To get the first index out of that, we can do this in a Django template, and that gives us the actual object with the stringified representation here of the name, the username, which is 𝗏𝗏𝗡. And there's a couple of other things we can do. Let's go back to the template here and clear this out. Now we can actually check if any accounts exist for a given provider. So we can use an if statement here, and we can check if the user has any signed up social accounts for a particular provider, in this case Google. And then once we've done that, we can create a template for loop, and we can loop over each account in accounts.google. And for each account, what we could potentially do here is add an image tag and link to the extra data.picture property that contains the avatar. So we can take that account, we can access extra_data, and there's a field in there called picture for Google accounts. We can access that. And don't forget the alt property on an image in HTML, and let's finally give this some width of 100. Now if we save this and go back to the page, let's refresh this page, and now we see this guy's avatar appearing on the page. Now here's another super useful template tag. It's the provider login URL, and you can get the login URL very easily for a given provider, for example OpenID or Twitter. So that allows you to easily link to provider login pages. It generates a URL that starts the OAuth authentication flow for a specific social provider like Google or Facebook. So let's go to another template that we have and add this. We're going to go to index.html. To start an authentication flow, of course, we shouldn't be logged in, so we're going to check for that in a second. At the top here, let's load the social account template tags, and then we're going to check in this template if the user is authenticated. And let's end that if statement below. So if the user is not authenticated, we want to give them a link to the Google provider login URL. So in order to do that, we can use that provider login URL template tag. And I'm going to paste some code in here. So we have a simple header 2 asking the user to sign in. And then we have an anchor tag here, and notice the href property. We're using provider login URL, and we provide the Google provider as an argument to that, and then a next URL after authentication has completed. Now if we save this and go back to the applications index page and refresh this page, we now see that because we are not logged in, we get this Google URL, so we can click that and we're taken to the authentication page. And we can click our user and we're going to be authenticated and taken back to the secret page. So that is how easy it is to just add these provider login links to a page. You can use this template tag, and of course you can make this look a lot nicer. So what I'm going to do is paste some code that I prepared here. So I'm overriding that anchor tag, but we do keep the provider login URL tag. And again, we're linking to Google here, but I've added a bunch of SVG elements here. So we have the parent SVG itself and then some path elements. And what that's going to do is allow us to style these URLs. So let's log out of the application. And that's the kind of OAuth provider link that you're maybe more used to seeing on a page. So you can style these however you like, but you can use this provider login URL template tag to actually link to the correct URL for any provider that you have set up in your application. So we've talked a bit here about the template tags that are built into the social account package in django-allauth. What I want to do at the end of this video is address a scenario that can happen in real life. So imagine you already have a Django account with an email, for example, john@example.com, and you created that account using a username and a password. Now later on you go and you try and sign in using Google with the same email address. So what should happen there, because you already have an account and that's got a password associated with it, when you sign in with the same email address using the Google provider, should it create a new account or not? So I want to demonstrate this, and in order to do so, I've removed that social account that we added using the allauth test user. So we're going to re-add that in a second, but only after we sign up using the normal sign up form. Now remember, when we use this normal sign up form, it's going to create a normal user account in the database. So let's sign up just now, and we're going to look at that user. So when we submit the form, we're signed into the application and that user gets a confirmation email. And the reason for that is because we have account email verification set to optional. And you can see in the console at the bottom that that email has come in. So let's go to that page and verify the email address. And once that's done, we can now move forward. Now, if we look at the database, we have a normal Django auth user object here. and that has the email address of 𝗏𝗏testUser@gmail.com. So what we now want to do is try and log out of this application and sign up, or log in rather, using Google and using the same email address. So let's go back to the application. We're going to log out here, and then we're going to go to this sign in with Google. So if we click that here and go to the continue page, we're going to select this account here at the top, and then we get taken to this page here with the sign up form. Now this is the extra fields and the extra form that we specified in a previous video, and this allows us to specify the username. So I'm going to give this guy a random username here and a random phone number. And when we hit the sign up button, notice this message here: an account already exists with this email address. Please sign into that account first and then connect your Google account. So we get that helpful message from django-allauth. Now I'm going to try and just change this email address and see what happens. And I'm getting redirected here to the admin, and that's because I think if we go back to the index.html here, for some reason I specified the next URL to be /admin, but we are now logged into the application. So let me remove this here and go to /secret. So we're now logged in, but what's happened in the database here? Let's open up this database and let's go to the social account table that we have and refresh this data. So we now have a new row here with the ID of 2. Again, the provider is Google. And if we scroll to the right hand side, we are linked to user with the ID of 12. Now the user with the ID of 12, if we go to the auth user table and refresh this table here, we have this record on line 11 here with the ID of 12. And again, it's got an unusable password. If we scroll to the right, you can see it's changed that email there, and we have the changed username here as well. Now this is quite confusing. I think the original message from django-allauth to connect the account by logging into the normal user, that's the best approach here. But sometimes you don't want this to create another user record. What you want to happen is you want to associate the social account with the existing user record. So we're going to show how to do that just now, and in order to do so, I'm going to remove this social account, and we're going to sign up again in a second after changing some settings, and we're also going to remove this user record here with the ID of 12. So I'm back on the Django admin, and we can go to the users table, and we're going to go to this user here, the one that we amended and the one that used Google to sign up, and we can delete that user, and it's going to propagate that deletion to also the user profile and also the social account that was created. So let's remove all of those, and we still have the user with this email address that signed up using the normal sign up form. So that's a normal accounts based sign up. Let's now go back to the application. We're going to log out, and before we try and sign back in, we're going to look at a couple of settings in the django-allauth social account application. So let's go to this configuration page. And the first one to look at is this one here. It's called Social Account Email Authentication. So let's read over this just now. Consider a scenario where a social login occurs and the social account comes with a verified email address, but that email address is already taken by a local user account. And additionally, assume that the local user account does not have any social account connected. Now, if the provider can be fully trusted, you can argue that we should treat this scenario as a login to the existing local user account, even if that account doesn't have a social account already connected. Now, the default for this is false, but if we change this to true, it's going to try and make that connection automatically with an existing email address. So what we can do here is we can set it on a per provider basis. For Google, we know that's a trusted provider, so we could copy this setting here. And I'm going to go back to settings.py, and at the bottom we had the social account setting here. I'm going to add that to the Google provider. And there's one other setting that I want to add, and it's the one just below here, social account email authentication auto connect. So when this email authentication is applied from the above setting, this additional setting is going to control whether or not the social account is automatically connected to the local account. Now, if we keep it at the default of false, the local account remains unchanged during the login. But if we set this to true, the social account for which the email is matched is automatically added to the list of social accounts connected to the local account. Now, that's a bit of a mouthful, but I hope it makes sense. We're going to see this in action just now. So I'm going to copy this setting, and we're going to put this as a global setting here and set it to true. So this time when we log in using Google, using the same email address as an existing local user, we don't want that additional user account to be created. We want to automatically link the new social account to the existing user. So let's try this out. I'm going to go back to the application and let's go to the login page here. and we're going to try and log in using Google. So let's continue here, and we can select the 𝗏𝗏 test user, and we're going to be logged into the application. So the login has occurred automatically this time. We weren't asked for any additional details. And if we go to the database here, let's have a look at what we have in the user table. So I removed that previous user, but we still have the user that was signed up via the accounts, via the form. That's the normal user, the local user. And when we refresh the table, notice that no new records have been added. So we don't have a new user record. But if we go to the social account table, prior to me logging in with Google, this was empty. But if we now refresh this, we have a new record with the ID of 𝗏. And this record is linked to the user, this time with the ID of 11. And that was the existing user that we have here with the email address that we specified. So what's happened here is that a user with this email address signed up to the application using the normal form and added a password. And then later on, that same email address tried to sign in using Google, but the match was made and the connection was made between the social account and the existing user because of the settings that we added. Now the default behavior would be to create a new social account and add a new user as well, but this time we have linked the two based on the email addresses. And it's important to note that this linking is only possible if the email address is verified. So if we look at this user record here with the ID of 11, if we go to the account email address table, you can see the record at the bottom associated with this email address, and the verified flag is set to 1. So it must be verified, and that makes sense because you don't want to link accounts based on unverified emails. That's a potential security risk. So the settings that we have added in these lines of code, these address the scenario where someone signs up normally but later tries to log in using the Google provider and the same email address as they originally signed up as. So that's going to wrap it up for this one. This has been a video on social authentication using Google in this case. And in the application, we can now log in and sign up using Google and have access to the data sent by Google's identity provider after the login is completed. And that is stored in the database using these social account tables that we see here. And this is seamlessly integrated with the django-allauth accounts application. So we also get the normal user objects that we all know, and we have the social accounts linked to those users via a foreign key. In the next video, we're going to look at another provider and linking multiple providers to a single account. And then we're going to move on and look at scopes and social tokens and how to fetch data from providers before moving on to multi-factor authentication. So all of those videos are coming up. And if you're finding this content useful and you want to support the channel, check out our Ko-fi page. We've got a link just below the video. And if you want to support the channel further, we have just released our first Udemy course. Thank you very much to everybody who has purchased that course. It's greatly appreciated. And I hope you're finding that content useful. And we have more of these in-depth courses being planned at the moment for various topics. And later in this series, we are going to look at cloud providers such as Microsoft Azure and also AWS. So those are coming up too. Lots of things we want to cover, just not a lot of time, unfortunately, but plenty coming up on the channel. Thank you again for watching, and we'll see you soon in the next video.